Hey everybody, it's Carolyn Bloom from Bloom Handmade Studio. Happy to be on the channel here today to tell you about the crocheted afghan that I've been posting about over on Instagram for the past few days. I've had some lovely comments and questions about the blanket, and I thought I would just come on here and record a video to tell you all the particulars about the blanket should you be interested in making one as well. Before I jump into that though, let me just tell you that you can find me over on Instagram at Bloom Handmade Studio or on my website, which is bloomhandmadestudio.com, or on Facebook, same name, Bloom Handmade Studio, or on Ravelry, which is Bloom Handmade over there. If you want to email me or get in touch, don't hesitate to DM me over on Instagram, or you can use my email address, which is carolyn@bloomhandmadestudio.com. So let me just jump right in to this blanket and tell you that I made this probably 12 to 13 years ago when I was still a relative newbie to the art of crochet, and had an idea that I wanted a cream colored blanket, and I thought that that would be something really beautiful, timeless, and maybe something I can pass on to my kids. I don't know. I don't know that either of them will want something like this, but that was the thought way back when. And I happened to come across in my local library this wonderful book called 200 Crochet Blocks by Jan Eaton. I think that there are a couple of versions of this book out in the world, and I had gotten a message from someone saying that I think there's a new edition of it coming out very soon. So if you do a little recon on the interweb, you might find that there's something new and improved coming out. But truth be told, I think this book as is pretty wonderful. You could probably find this in your local yarn shop on their shelves. It's a timeless book. It's been around for a long while, and I really think it's a terrific place to get started if you're new to crochet or to making motifs, working in the round. This book is really wonderful for getting right into that technique. In addition to that, she also does a wonderful job providing insight and thoughts on color. And I'll just give you an example here. I didn't use this block in my blanket, but this particular block is one of my favorites. This is called Daisy Chain, and one of the things that Ms. Eaton does is she shows you different color combinations that could be beautiful as you're thinking about what kind of blanket you might like to make. So here she has the blue and the gold, and then she shows you other iterations. And then this little part right here, which I love, shows you the other blocks in this book that she thinks would pair nicely with that daisy chain block. And so she's kind of like the sommelier of crochet. Hey, that kind of rhymes. I like that. Anyways, I really like how she put so much thought into her information and how she structured this book. And I really encourage you to get it to not only try to recreate some of her ideas of these motifs, but also to just enjoy her thought process and her own aesthetic and sense of creativity. So without further ado, let me just jump in and tell you the nitty-gritty, crochet gritty, of how I made my particular blanket, and even get into the number of squares of each of the motifs that I made. See if that might be of use. So this blanket weighs 1,800 grams. It's a beast of a blanket. It's heavy, and crochet just devours yardage. And so 1,800 grams, I probably bought 20 skeins of the yarn that I used, which was Knit Pix's Wool of the Andes Bear yarn. It's their worsted weight, undyed, and so it's their natural colorway. They call it their bear colorways. So again, Knit Pix's Wool of the Andes worsted weight. It's $4.99 a skein, and each skein has 100 grams. And it occurs to me I should probably tell you that don't worry about writing all this down. If you peek into the show notes down below, I'll put all this information in there so that you can find it easily. So don't worry, I'll give it all to you there. And I'm also gonna include a photograph of the layout for the motifs in the video here. So you can, if you wanna knock this off exactly, you can, or you could just use this as a starting point for yourself. Okay, so I made this, as I said, 12 to 15 years ago, 13 years ago. And so I don't actually remember what size hook I used, but according to Knit Picks, this Wool of the Andes worsted calls for an I through K hook. I went through and looked to see which hooks I have in that size, and I have an I hook, but none of the others. So I suspect that I used an I hook from way back when. So just play around with whichever hooks you have and see which one feels right as you're working with the yarn. Just like with knitting, I find that crochet will vary by user, by maker, and so because I used an eye hook doesn't mean that that's going to be the one that you enjoy working with. Just grab what you've got and start following her instructions and see how it looks and feels. If it's too loose, go a little lower on your hook. If it's too tight, grab a larger hook and just see how it feels as you swatch along. I told you already it's a large blanket. Let me give you the exact particulars. It is a square that is 66 inches or 166 centimeters in length and width. Each block is 8 by 8 inches. That's 20 centimeters by 20 centimeters. And the difference in the 8 blocks in width and 8 blocks in length, I also put a couple rounds of single crochet around the blanket, which makes it just a little bit bigger and tidies up those edges. And I'll show you what that looks like here in just a couple minutes. Okay, again, all of this will be in the show notes, but I'll just tell you what blocks I used to make the blanket. I used her willow square, which is on page 106. It's blocks 189 through 192. So 4 blocks of different colors is what she showed. I, of course, only used one color in mine, but you can see all the different alternatives in the book on page 106 for the willow square. I made 32 squares of that willow motif, and I'll show you how I laid it out here in just a minute. I also made the Gothic square, which is on page 80, block 94. I made 16 of those. I made the fudge squares, 8 of those, and that can be found on page 68, and it's called block number 69. So fudge is the name of the block. It's block 69 in the book on page 68. I made 8 of them. And then the last motif that I made is called Edwardian Fancy. It's on page 77 and it's block 88. I made 8 squares of those as well. So why don't I just hop over there and show you what each square looks like, and you can see if those are appealing to you. But again, if you've got a desire to make any sort of a motif blanket, I would encourage you to give this book by Jan Eaton a try. She's really amazing and so thoughtful in how she laid out the contents and each motif and showed how they will partner with one another so nicely. It's a world of possibilities in between these covers. So let's hop on over there. I'll show you the blanket. And as I said, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to send me an email at carolyn@bloomhandmadestudio.com. All right, so here's a close-up of the blanket and each of the squares that I made. Let me just start here in the corner. This particular motif is the Edwardian Fancy. Oh no, excuse me, this is the Gothic Square motif that Jan Eaton designed. And what I did is I ran Gothic Square on the diagonals, making an X along the blanket. I chose that as kind of my anchor for this blanket on the diagonal because I loved how these holes here that I crocheted ran into each other and really caused the blanket to have a beautiful flow to it. This over here is the willow motif. And willow is the one square that features predominantly throughout the blanket. I love them all, but if I want to be honest, this is probably my favorite. Don't tell the other squares, but this one I like the very best. And so I use this on the perimeter of the blanket on all four sides. And I also repeated that here as you get close to the center of the blanket. And I'll show you the layout here. I'll do a snapshot of that here as soon as I'm done giving you the close-ups of each of the motifs. The third motif that I made is this one right here. And this one is called Edwardian Fancy. I love these names. So Edwardian Fancy, I made 8 of these and I partnered them nicely with Fudge, which is here right next to it. And I kind of liked how these they're similar but different. So I thought that they would play nicely in that second square within the square. And so I made 8 of Edwardian Fancy and 8 of Fudge. And here is the layout that I followed. All right, so I'm just gonna pause here so you can get this if you want it. You can see I did Gothic square on the diagonal, making the X, willow on the perimeter, Edwardian Fancy alternating along here, so 8 of those. And then here are my Fudge squares that I kind of interspersed between the Edwardian Fancies. So I really love how this came together, and the Knit Picks yarn was a really nice affordable option to make this blanket. It's not, I wouldn't say that it's soft, but it is certainly a hardy blanket or a hardy yarn that was really good for this beginner, as I had to pull things out repeatedly and try again. I should also just mention that one of the other techniques that I learned was how to work single crochet to attach my squares. And so I would work them starting from over here. I would connect them all going along this way, and then I would work the vertical to attach them that way. And then here is the couple rounds, maybe 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 rounds of single crochet, which I did to just kind of tighten things up and make them look nice and tidy. Oh, and now that I'm up here up close and personal looking at these more closely, I think I also did 2 rounds of single crochet around each block. After I had finished the instructions that Ms. Eaton provided, I did 2 rounds of single crochet just to make those blocks really nice and tidy. All right, so that's basically the gist of it, guys. This is the afghan I made. I love it. It's really warm, even though it's quite holy. It's been a treat to have such a warm response to it, so thank you so much for that. And if you have any questions, again, please don't hesitate to send me an email or a DM over on Instagram. I'm happy to help out. Okay, bye-bye.